Thank you all for dialing in. My name is Jeen. I'm an associate at KG Zeroin, one of the co-hosts of the GAIC alongside e-daily newspapers. So first off, let me give you a brief agenda of today's event. We're hosting today's webinar to discuss the field of ship financing and related possible investment opportunities, specifically in regards to environmentally focused ship financing. We're featuring our very special guest, Entrust Global, the general partner of the Blue Ocean for Impact Fund. And also 3 panelists are here with us today with the field's top expertise on the topic. Entrust Global, they recently launched Purus Marine, whose CEO, Mr. Julian Proctor, who's based in London, is here with us today to give us a presentation on environment-focused maritime investments, ship financing, etc. The company serves a wide variety of maritime sectors, including industrial shipping, short sea, ferry, offshore wind, and environmental remediation sectors, which makes Julian a more than qualified speaker on the topic. Next, we will then have a panel discussion. Our panel is comprised of top maritime experts spanning former state-run banker, investor of financial institutions, an investment relations expert on shipbuilding company, who are joining us today to discuss and provide wonderful insight into a number of issues and topics. The panel will follow up on Mr. Proctor's presentation. They'll each share their unique own opinion on their specific field, especially in the context of the South Korean market. Let me hand off to Entrust Mr. Sufian Omar, who will give us a brief overview of the firm. As a side note, Mr. Omar is the Senior Managing Director at Entrust Global. He covers the Asian business development. So let's find out what their new initiative is all about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jeen. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to this webinar, co-hosted by KG Zeroin and e-daily. I hope everyone is safe and healthy with this unusual time we're in today. My name is Sufian Omar, and I'm the head of sales for Entrust Global in Asia. For those who are not familiar with us, Entrust Global is an alternative investment manager, which is headquartered in New York. In addition to the US, we have offices in London, Paris, Seoul, and Singapore. Our clients include pension funds, sovereign wealth, insurance companies, endowments, and private banks. We manage around $19.5 billion in alternative strategies, out of which $2.5 billion is in real assets, investing in aviation and maritime sector. We are very happy to be a sponsor in this year's Global Alternative Investment Conference and to take part in today's webinar. This afternoon, as mentioned by Ms. Jeen, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Julian Proctor, will be presenting his thoughts on global supply chain to zero emissions. After his presentation, I guess, and I hope we will open the session for Q&A, and followed by the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Julian. But before that, a bit more introduction on Julian. He joined Entrust Global last year to head our impact strategy, and recently appointed as the CEO of Purus Marine, which is our operating company created to own and manage our impact-related assets. Julian was previously the CIO of Tiger Group, prior to which he worked at BNP Paribas Fortis, Ms. Pearson, ABN AMRO, and Rothschild. He brings with him 25 years of deep industry experience in originating and structuring deals, building businesses, and exiting them profitably. So without further ado, I hand over the session now to Julian to kick off the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks for that, Sufian. It's wonderful to be speaking back to South Korea again. I spent a good part of my time, particularly in Busan, where we built in previous lives dozens of ships at both Samsung Heavy and Hyundai Heavy. I, for the last 20 years, lived in Tokyo and Hong Kong. And over the years, was responsible for leading the building of a number of businesses, including companies like Seaspan. And as many of you will know, Seaspan was probably one of the largest orderers of ships in Korea of any shipowning company. So I'm no stranger to Korea, no stranger to the yards, to our good friends, particularly at Kexon, who have been big supporters in the past of our various businesses. So a big thank you. It's very exciting now to be building a new business, Purus Marine, which I run, hoping again to be doing as much business that we did at Seaspan and our other companies as I will be doing with Purus in Korea as well. So hopefully we'll be seeing you soon in person. I'm sure I'll be traveling to Korea the very soonest opportunity that foreigners are allowed into the country, and we'll be hopefully signing new build contracts and financing agreements. The presentation that we will make to you today, it's a little bit of a personal journey, which I wanted to share with you all. Over the last 5 to 6 years, I realized that the world had begun to change. And maybe we can go to the next pages. Okay, thank you. A personal journey, which I wanted to briefly share with you. And that being, I started to notice that a lot of the customers of previous businesses that I was heavily involved in building, they had begun to change. And then this is the liner companies, the mining companies, the very large food companies as well. When you go onto your Walmarts or your IKEAs, you would start to notice that not only were they concerned about the price of the goods that they would sell to people like you and me, but increasingly they would be focused on matters of what was the carbon footprint of the goods that they would be selling in the supermarkets, or when a energy company would, funnily enough, be selling their goods and services at the gas station, how in fact that carbon footprint could be bad news for the planet. And at that point, I started to realize that there really needed to be a change and a refocusing on the marine business as relates to the environment. And that's really the background of Purus, that we are I believe, the very first environmentally focused marine vessel owning business globally. And our entire focus is on owning those ships which will make the planet a better place, which will have lower carbon emissions. And in doing so, it will mean our business ultimately will be more successful. And we'll go into that in a little bit of time. You can see that we've assembled a great team, and this is just part of the team on this slide. We've got more members. We're headquartered in London, as my good friend and colleague Sufian said. There's a team of professionals, work from some very large companies. I've hired some of the best and brightest talent that I could, mostly at Gaslog, which you probably know is also a very large order of LNG carriers in Korea. So we've built up a great team, probably the best team, I think, when it comes to leasing that you will find. We also have some of my colleagues in New York. I have a second office in New York, where we have our environmental professionals. And I think over time, we'll be adding an Asian location as well. So depending on how much business we're doing, you might be surprised. Maybe we open up an office in Busan. So we can continue to the next slide. Thank you. On the next slide. Yep. The next, yeah, thank you. What's little known, I think, for most people is just how important the blue economy is called. At least that's how it's now called in Europe. The blue economy really is every industry which is associated with the oceans. And that is the production of food, it's the production of energy, it's the transportation of both people, but also of commodities. And as you're probably all aware, it's probably a $5 to $6 trillion industry. It's enormous. It's one of the largest. If you were to size it as an individual economy, it would be bigger than a Germany or a Japan. So it's important. It helps provide a livelihood for about 1 billion people. So many lives depend on the ocean industry. So we want to make sure that we focus our business, Purus Marine, on owning the most environmentally vessels which improve ocean health, reduce carbon emissions, because ultimately it really is the right thing to do. And as you know, each of these sectors is growing at a very high speed. If you were to look at sustainable fisheries, there is a very fast rate of growth in fisheries, and it's the same in energy. European offshore wind will grow from 40 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts within the next several decades. So we're really focusing on sectors which will see phenomenal amounts of growth going forward. Let's go to the next slide. We don't need to spend too much time on the carbon impacts, and we've probably all read the reports on the importance of climate change. You always have the typical photo of the polar bear on the stranded iceberg. Well, that's just the start. Over here in Europe, only this month, we started to have some of the most extreme weather events as a result of climate change. It's a massively important factor. It's one which is it's not going to go away, and without change, the environmental impacts will only become more and more acute. So there's a increased responsibility on the shipping industry to that challenge. We're responsible for about 2% of global emissions, and that will increase to about 17% in 2050 if we don't make material changes now. So there's a real onus on us to take up the bat. You've probably all read today that a number of government bodies have put in place carbon schemes. The European Union announced a leaked document a few days ago, and we'll talk about that later on. The IMO has some very material carbon targets as well, and we can talk about those. Let's go to the next slide. We cover all the sectors of the ocean industries, and I wanted to give you a great picture of just those different sectors. So many areas that will be familiar to the Korean shipping industry: container ships, LNG carriers, dry bulk, tankers. But we also focus at Purus on wind power, ferries, environmental remediation. In fact, our fleet at the end of August will be about 25 vessels. Yesterday, we acquired a vessel in the offshore wind sector with a long-term contract to a renewable energy company. The week beforehand, we signed 3 new build contracts on container ships and long-term contracts to some of the largest port operators in the world. And this month, we will acquire another 21 electric ferries, which will be operating in Europe on some of the river systems. So it gives you a sense that we're active. We're really looking to focus on the most clean vessels, the most environmentally friendly vessels, but also those sectors which are climate aligned. And that's important because if you think about some sectors, they're going to have big headwinds. The transportation of heavy carbon molecules, crude oil tankers, in the next 10 to 15 years, the outlook will get more and more challenging. So you will see that businesses like ours, we won't be necessarily involved in crude oil tankers. And likewise with thermal coal, we don't like the outlook for the thermal coal industry. So we're more likely to be focusing on other sectors than thermal coal, much more focused on offshore wind, container ships, non-thermal coal, dry bulk, product tankers, ferries. So sectors which we know have got a good climate aligned future. Let's continue going. Next page. Next page. I will broadly just spend a few moments on this, and that is the drivers of why we built the business. And there really are demand drivers and supply drivers. On the demand side, we talked about the customers right at the beginning. And on the right-hand side, all of these customers are all moving to net zero carbon strategies. In fact, some of these are already our customers of Purus Marine. They have announced they will reduce their supply chain emissions over the next several decades because they are being pushed by people like you and me to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to do it. And this is not just talk. The Porsche only yesterday announced they will go entirely green this decade. So they will start sourcing carbon neutral steel. They will start sourcing carbon neutral fuels as well. The question is, how do you then move cars on car carriers which are carbon neutral? And that is something, for example, which we will start focusing on as well, which is ensuring always that we align very heavily with our customers, being able to provide to them ships which are increasingly low carbon. There's also on the regulatory side, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, increasing pressure from regulators like the IMO. Frankly, the IMO could do much more. What we're seeing though is now the European Union is launching an emissions trading scheme. It's a cap and trade scheme, just like they launched 20 years ago across other industries. And the impact will be enormous. It will be introduced in 2023. It'll be fully implemented in 2026. And it will cover 50% of all import and export volumes going in and out of Europe. So those vessels which have got the most efficient carbon footprint, lowest on the highest fuel efficiency, they will pay the lowest tax. Those that don't will pay a much higher tax. So already we're seeing regulators, customers driving demand for increasing low carbon shipping. Let's go to the next page. It can't be said for the shipping fleet, the global shipping fleet, the low carbon global shipping fleet, which has either dual fuel or a very, very, very strong set of energy saving devices, and predominantly we mean dual fuel here, it's only 1%. There's 100,000 vessels in the world, and only about 1,000 of them today are really low carbon. It means there's 90,000 which are not low carbon. So think about the demand for those ships which will help align with climate change. And then you think about the number of ships which are available to do that, the gap gets bigger and bigger. Now, this is a great opportunity for Korean shipyards because it means they can be at the leadership and they can be at the forefront of building those vessels. But I will say, you have to focus and we've all got to be quick because I know there's a lot of European shipyards which are focusing on building electric vessels now and hydrogen powered vessels and methanol powered vessels. So I think it's a real challenge, but this is a huge opportunity for Korean shipyards as well to try and create some leadership here. There's a lack of equity capital. That's where we come in as Purus. And there's not enough money to help finance the trillions and trillions of dollars needed to build the ships. Because up until the last 6 months, none of the shipping companies were making any money. And all of the public equity markets were closed. We helped fill that gap. So by owning those ships and by time chartering them to big end users, we can help solve that problem. So that's what we do. We're looking hopefully to work with Korean shipyards, Korean shipping companies to ultimately help them find new customers. That would be a great opportunity for us, and we're looking forward to doing that. Let's go to the next page. And this is a very quick snapshot of the roadmap for the low carbon future. We've spent many, many years with the leading institutions globally who have an expertise in the energy transition, the Rocky Mountain Institute, UMass, the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability. So some of the largest academic organizations globally to come together with the various futures that we see on low carbon fuels. Today, it's very clear. Dual fuel LNG is very important, and some of our ships are already certainly LNG ready. But increasingly, a large part of our fleet is electric. We see for the short sea, so those sectors being offshore wind, ferries, the short sea vessels. Already, there's technology which is commercially viable, available for zero emission vessels today. It's not a It's not a future of 10 years away. It exists. We have some vessels which have space for 50 and 20 megawatt batteries, which really in the offshore wind space is a game changer. And as we look further into the future, we're going to see both an electron world and a molecule world power ships. The electron world will help the short sea vessels. The molecule world will help the deep sea vessels. And we're very much aligned with the hydrogen future. It's a key part of various national government strategies. I certainly know it is at an EU level and a Japan level. There's a big focus on hydrogen. I suspect also probably in Korea, there's a material focus on hydrogen. So the hydrogen pathway will evolve towards ammonia, and ultimately, as we all know on this call, hydrogen and ammonia-based fuels, they have no carbon molecules, which is a phenomenal potential for a low carbon future for our children going forward. Let's go to the next page. It's not only the primary propulsion, but also we're focused on varying forms of energy saving devices, which we've spent a lot of time looking at. Do we add sail capacity to our vessels? The answer for us is that we are more likely on the deep sea vessels to consider some of these solutions which are already commercially viable. Although I think you will find for us that wind power will be something which is a technology we are likely to retrofit on our vessels in the next few years. Although I will tell you, the advancements are phenomenal. I was only with one wind company last week. The savings they will make on carbon emissions and fuel consumption, they can reduce fuel consumption by 30% on some of the trade routes which they are operating. So big steps forwards in that technology. Let's go forward. Next page. Next page. Okay, we talked about this on the next page. I think it's worth sometimes putting the figures into, or the challenge that we're trying to solve into real figures, because people don't get necessarily a sense of how material the air pollution is from the marine sector. And that is, we in the marine industry, it's not only the carbon dioxide emissions that we need to care about, but it's other particulate matter such as sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxide, which also have a material impact on our health. Nitrogen oxide, for example, is a very poisonous gas. It comes from shipping. Shipping is responsible for 15% of global emissions. It's been associated with a lot of life mortality. The good news is we have technology already in place to help reduce these emissions, and substantially most of the ships going forward, which will be built, will help reduce this. But we're focused, I'm sure, on reducing each one of these particular gases because they all have terrible life-threatening effects. And in this COVID area, I will tell you, some of them have been associated with increased levels of COVID morbidity. So particulate matter, for example, which is a big emission of ships, and especially PM2.5 has been highly correlated with COVID deaths. So again, this is something which is super important, especially around ports where you find a lot of shipping. Let's go to the next page. And this gives you a little bit of a roadmap for the future in terms of the regulatory backdrop for what we're seeing. And then really it's just a story of increasing and tightening regulations. So there's a real slowness in the last 5 years, but it has picked up pace beyond all belief in the last 12 months. Every country has had a net zero carbon strategy. China, Japan, Korea, European Union, also America rejoins Paris. So there's an increasing pressure on all parts of the industry. And only recently we're in talks with some of our American friends, American officials, and they will double down on the maritime space. This is a priority for them. So the pressure will not let up. Let's carry on going. Next page, please. I made this point briefly before regarding equity. This is the challenge. We remember all the good days in shipping, and there was 7 or 8 years ago. Since then, there's been very little equity capital which has been brought into the industry. It's a real challenge. It's a real shame, but there just isn't enough equity to finance the industry, and we need to solve that. That's what we're doing with Purus. Let's go to the next page. The good news is the debt industry is really doubling down. They're becoming increasingly aligned with the green future. And that's good news for us because we as a ship owner, we have a lot of equity. We have some phenomenal shareholders, government shareholders, but we are aligned with where the banks want to lend. That is, the major banks, they all have green strategies. They have an association now called the Poseidon Principles, and they represent almost $200 billion of ship lending, which is a phenomenal amount. And they're really focused on only lending to shipping companies which have got a green future. So those businesses which are in the wrong industries, non-climate aligned vessels will find it harder. The cost of capital will get expensive. So we are fully aligned with accessing the lowest cost of capital, making sure that the vessels that we own, they provide the best green features, but also we're most attractive to all of these lenders, which you'll see here. And I know many of the Korean shipping banks are very much focused on this as well. So we're looking forward to their participation as well in associations like Poseidon. Let's go to the next page. This really just gives you a snapshot of everything that we do in our business. As I mentioned, by the end of next month, we'll be at 25 vessels. We're really looking to service the biggest end users globally. I think we can be a great partner for the Korean shipping industry. It's across all of these different sectors. And you can see there's just so many different sectors of the marine industry. It's not just containers and tankers and bulkers that we all think. There's over 10 sectors that we cover in marine. I'll give you a little example on the fishery side. So many people depend on fishing vessels for providing low carbon protein. Fishing is much lower carbon protein than meat. Meat production levels have phenomenal amounts of methane. So as we go to climate transition, we will need to ensure not only do we have more seafood production, but also the way that we harvest and the way that we move seafood as well is done in a clean way. So for us, this is just an important point to mention to everybody that when we think of ocean health, we think about climate transition. It's not just container ships and bulkers and tankers, but there's other important sectors too. Next page, please. Now, if you have any questions regarding our business, which is a great business, then you can contact my colleagues, which you can see on this page, Kenneth Cho, who's up in Korea, and Sufian Omar, who runs our business overall in Asia. And I think that was a phenomenal 30 minutes. I'd like to thank you, everybody, for listening, and I think I was right on time. Over to you, Jeen.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor, for the presentation. Sounds like maritime financing is something investors should really look into, individuals or institutions, especially considering the fact that the economy is in the recovery phase from the COVID. Trade, shipping, all these maritime sub-industry sectors are reviving. Also, commodity prices are rising. Ironically, it's posing a serious problem to reducing carbon emission efforts. Also, I'm aware of the diversification of these zero carbon efforts across all sectors of maritime industry. I can only imagine the impact acting on this abundant opportunity that you gave us information on. Hopefully South Korea can join the team of zero carbon leaders, possibly in the future. Actually, while you were on your presentation, we received 2 questions. May I read out one of the questions for you? And you can possibly answer?
I'd love to answer that.
Number 1, I am aware of the active decarbonization efforts to curb the worst effects of global warming. And I know it's taking place in South Korea right now. But the real problem is 80% of maritime financing is backed by government efforts, as opposed to having critically low participation coming from the private sector. What do you think are, based on your experiences and data, some of the resolutions to this issue? How can we induce more funding from the private sector? What do you think are some of the ideas?
So we are, Purus Marine is that idea. So we are the very first environmentally focused owner of these vessels anywhere globally. And that's all we do. We just focus on providing our equity to help that energy transition. So this is why we are here. We are here to help. We are the private sector, which is looking to solve the climate challenge. And we're focused on providing that equity capital to the industry. The great news is that there's so many banks now which are also doing this. Some of my greatest friends their entire banks are now focused on providing debt capital to the industry. The Citibank, I was only having dinner with the chairman of Citibank Europe last month, and he was commending Purus on the great efforts that we were making in providing equity capital to the industry. And he is the chairman of the Poseidon Principles. He's not only the chairman of Citibank Europe, but he's the chairman of Poseidon Principles. So when you have great stakeholders like this, we will make phenomenal change. I do think the public sector needs to increasingly take a close look at this. So the ECAs, they need to, and I know they're doing a great job, but they need to also take on board a lot of the carbon reporting, which will be needed to make the world a better and safer place. But there's no lack of debt capital focused on this. You only saw probably this week Kawasaki launched a green bond, which they priced. They got better cost of funding than they would have otherwise have done. Now you're seeing many sustainability linked loans as well, which are increasingly happening. So there's just a phenomenal pace of change happening. More and more debt capital is being made available to the industry like never before. So I just call on the ECAs to just really focus on this and help Purus, support Purus as well in building our business. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you think commercial banks, mutual associations, endowments in South Korea are close to partnering up with Purus? Is there any lined up?
Yeah, we're looking forward to that happening, Jeen. I'm sure that many institutions will likely partner up with us in the future, because if you think about it, we just have a phenomenal business model. We own the best possible ships. We own some of the best possible ships, and they are contracted long term to the highest quality customers and end users. So we have very, very stable cash flows, which ultimately mean that we can pay phenomenal dividends and provide a really, really attractive return to our shareholders. So I think will be a great story for many Korean institutionals. Would love them to be partners with us, because we provide a real environmental impact, and having a green focused business is good business, because it means your vessels earn more, you get a lower cost of capital, you're future proofing your asset, you have better access to debt. So everything works together. So we're a much better investment proposition than other shipping companies. So I would urge Korean institutions to be contacting Sufian and Kenneth very quickly.
Great. Sounds like we definitely need a sort of bonding event.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. So
there's actually another question for you that popped up. Let me read it out. As Mr. Proctor also pointed out in the later part of his presentation, majority of capital that backs up the environment-focused shipbuilding and operations in the European maritime industry is also backed highly by debt financing. And this opens up opportunities for equity capital. Can you elaborate on this, or just tell us how it's going in terms of funding equity capital?
Well, it's a real challenge, Jeen. There is no equity capital in shipping. The public markets for shipping are really in a difficult place today. So I think in order to get interest back from institutional investors, there's got to be a fundamental shift in the way that the marine business does business. It's got to be increasingly environmentally focused. And we hear this. One of the good things about having entrusted one of our founding shareholders of Purus is we talk to the biggest institutional investors on the planet, the sovereign wealth funds, big pension plans in the United States, and would love to be spending more time with the Korean pension plans as well. And the message is clear. We will focus in environmentally focused businesses, right? And we will not be investing in businesses which are not environmentally focused.
Right.
So for the marine sector to get that money, it's got to get its act together and create green business models, do what we're doing, because public equity investors will not be investing in an industry which they view as being fossil. They won't invest in an industry which they believe is old economy. Just look at tobacco, look at the arms industry, look at these other sectors, the amount of money which has moved out of those industries. Look at all the money which has moved into renewables. So I'll just leave it there. I've said enough.
Yeah, sounds like green business is really the key to waking the marine industry up in terms, I mean, they're an old economy. In terms of transitioning into a new one, yeah, it makes sense that you're focusing so much on the green business. Yeah, thank you for your answers. Next up is our panel discussion. Our panelists will be expanding and highlighting on Mr. Proctor's key points that were laid out in his presentation just now. I'm personally fascinated to hear what they have to say. To give you sort of an idea of these panelists' backgrounds, I'm sure you'd be curious. Our first panelist, Mr. Hee Jong-seo, is currently working for KOMARF, Korea Maritime Finance Corporation, the first established ship fund management company in South Korea, actually. He has wide prior experience in asset management companies. Prior to joining the KOMARF in 2019, he worked for the National Pension System for 3 years. He started his career at the Kookmin Investment Trust Company after having graduated from Yonsei University in '89. Is that right? Our second panelist, oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. Mr. Song, we have an investment relations expert at Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering Company. He's been in charge since 2018. KSOE is a holding company of Hyundai Heavy. Before that, he was a renowned research analyst at a brokerage firm, Daewoo Securities. He covered shipbuilding and heavy engineering industry for almost 20 years. He's received master's degree in mechanical engineering at Busan National University. Dr. Jaemin Lee, I'm sorry, I interrupted. He's currently the CEO of Maritime Finance Research Institute, a private research center focusing on finance in the maritime industry, specifically. He retired from the being professor of Korea Maritime and Ocean University, a university that's backed by the Korean government, actually. Before being a professor, he worked for the Korea Export and Import Bank for up to 30 years. And he's got a PhD degree in economics, and he got it in America, actually, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I would like to first ask Dr. Lee to kick off our discussion, kind of, by giving us an overview on the South Korean maritime industry, if that's possible. As you all should be well aware, South Korea has built leading capabilities in shipyard fabrication, leading shipping companies, and sort of an ecosystem of supporting lenders and investors. What does South Korean industry need to do now to succeed in this new economy of decarbonization?
Okay. It is my pleasure to attend this webinar discussing future ship investment. And I'm very happy to listen to Mr. Julian Proctor's excellent presentation. Let me give you my opinion on the questions the moderator asked me. First, I will briefly explain Korea's shipbuilding and shipping industry. Korean shipyards received new building orders of $18.3 billion in 2020, taking the world's first place with a market share of 42.5%. In the first quarter of 2021 this year, the Korean shipyard market share increased to 50%. The global shipbuilding industry has seen a slump for about a decade, but seems to have got stronger again with a rising demand for eco-friendly vessels. Korean shipyards are at the forefront. In the case of LNG-fueled vessels, which are the intermediate stage of carbon-free vessels, Korean shipyards account for more than 90% in the world. Meanwhile, Korea's shipping industry has the world's fifth largest capacity until 2015, but suffered difficulties due to the bankruptcy of Hanjin Shipping in 2016. However, Korean shipping industry has been regaining its competitiveness thanks to the government's 5-year shipping reconstruction plan. In particular, HMM, Korea's largest shipping company, recorded a huge amount of operating profit due to a surge in container freight rates this year. HMM has developed into the world's 7th largest shipping company in terms of shipping capacity. In order that Korea's shipping and the shipbuilding industry secure competitiveness in the future, it is necessary to actively respond to the era of decarbonization. Currently, the government, shipyards, and the shipping companies are working hard to achieve green shipping. The Korean government has declared carbon neutrality by 2050, and it plans to launch a climate fund next year to help the country meet its goal of net zero carbon emission by 2050 and become a low carbon economy. In addition to responding to the government policy, Korean shipping companies should increase their investment in eco-friendly new buildings and ship retrofit in order to comply with the IMO's decarbonization regulations. For example, HMM said its carbon emissions volume reduced by 40% from 28 to 2020, and is now planning to reduce another 50% by 2030 under the goal of achieving carbon net zero by 2050. Korean shipyards also have invested a large amount of money in R&D for future vessels, and they will continue to increase their investment in the future. However, the success of all of these clean shipping efforts depends on strong financial support. Unfortunately, Korea's ship finance is weak compared to the global status of shipbuilding and the shipping industry. Korean shipyards receive financial support indirectly from Korea's ECA, Export Credit Agency, like Korea Action Bank and the KSOE, and international commercial banks when shipping companies place orders to Korean shipyards. And we have one more. Can I say the more?
Yeah.
Okay. We have one more state-run ship finance agency. It is Korean Overseas Business Corporation, or KOBC, which was established in 2018 for the purpose of supporting Korea's marine industry. KOBC has provided financial guarantee to institutional investors when they invest in vessels. The problem with Korean ship finance is that the commercial banks and the institutional investors have not been active in ship investment. They feel that Korean shipping companies are not financially secure, having support from bankruptcy of Hanjin Shipping in 2016. So state-run banks try to encourage institutional investors to participate in the ship finance market. In conclusion, the success of green shipping in Korea depends on stronger financial support, and for this, institutional capital is an urgently needed. Thank you.
Very urgent.
Yeah, right.
Thank you for the overview. For your information, he's been in the industry for almost 30 years. He's the living, he's the industry. You can't discuss Korean maritime without Dr. Lee. Thank you. We have 5 questions to facilitate our panel discussion. We have question number 1 for Mr. Ki Won-seo. He's the CEO of Korea Maritime Finance Corporation, previously at Korean Investment Trust Company, National Pension Services. Here's your question. In Europe, it seems to be that institutional capital is now chasing increasingly climate-aligned investment opportunities. Is this also true in South Korea? Is there a possibility of creating a green finance / green shipping nexus? What are your thoughts, Mr. Ki Won-seo?
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this seminar. And before answering the question, I'd like to introduce briefly our company and some background of this ship finance industry in Korea for understanding of the foreign asset managers. Okay, the KOMARF, the Korea Marine Financing Company, was established in year 2003 under the law of the Korea Ship Investment Law, and our company was incorporated by KDB, the Korean public bank, and before acquired by SM Group at the moment, until year 2017. It used to be the subsidiary of Purus Shipbuilding and Marine company. And now, our company is a subsidiary of SM Group. Now, we used to set up and manage it, various, ship financing funds, to provide the mezzanine or the subordinate financing when the shipping companies newly build the ships or purchase the used second-hand ships. And now we have the public entity called KOBC to support the whole shipping industry in Korea. And going back to the question, the Korean institutional investors are recognizing the importance of green finance as part of the broader concept of ESG investments. Besides public investors, commercial banking groups like KB, Shinhan, NHG has announced that long-term investment for financing plans of tens of billions of dollars for the next 10 years. Under these plans, their main interests seem to be environment-friendly infrastructure investments. And public banks such as KDB, KAXIM, or the entity KOBC as well have set their own budgets for eco-friendly infrastructure investments, including the ship investments and support the shipping companies. As far as shipping sector is concerned, such green investments are more focused on the terminals, LNG bunkering ships, and so-called eco ship financing for domestic coastliners, which are driven by Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. Other institutional investors seem to be still a little bit reluctant to invest in ships due to their bad memories of investment failures in ships during the financial crisis. And as mentioned previously, bankruptcy of Hanjin Shipping. But I expect there will be a slowly emerging institutional investors, public or privately, who may identify and benefit from investment opportunities in global green ship financing, and even in domestic shipping industry as well. And recent some trend is that as far as the equity market is concerned, some big shipping companies like H-Line or SM lines, they are preparing the IPOs this year. And we have 3 or 4 listed shipping companies in Korea, but the other unlisted shipping companies are looking at some opportunities in the public investment sectors, mainly the equity market. So through that kind of trends, more and more interest from institutional investors will be achieved going forward. That's my opinion.
Thank you. So that wonderfully wraps up how far Korea is in terms of climate-aligned investments. Our next question is for Mr. KJ Sung. He's the managing director of Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering Company. He was also an analyst at a brokerage firm. He covered shipbuilding and heavy industries. So here's your question. How are South Korean shipyards creating the vessels of the future, given cargoes carried will change, propulsion system will change? How will they compete with the large resources from PRC shipyards in terms of R&D? What are your thoughts, Mr. KJ Song?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to join this event today. It's very evident that strengthened environmental regulations have greatly increased interest in eco-friendly vessels, especially in propulsion systems. What's different now than what it was in the past is that these days, regulations are gradually being strengthened on carbon emission cut of marine engines. Whereas in the past, regulations were strengthened around exhaust emission reduction in general. IMO addressed and reviews regulations to prevent ship source pollution every year. In this 76 convention of MEPC held last month, implementation of EEXI and CII were both adopted to reduce carbon emission, not only in newly built vessels, but also on existing vessels. Several solutions are being developed to reduce carbon emission, but development of eco-friendly propulsion system is the key, considering the lifespan of vessels that are 55 years. R&D of eco-friendly propulsion system will be carried out in a way that use very alternative fuels, such as LNG, LPG, methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen. Eventually, engine makers and shipbuilders like Hyundai Heavy Industry that has engine business are expected to lead the eco-friendly vessel market. The three main shipbuilders in Korea, South Korea, are developing and building eco-friendly vessels in a similar direction. Although there are some differences among the three. Currently, the most efficient eco-friendly vessel is the dual fuel options that use LNG, LPG, and methanol as a secondary fuel source. Along with the existing bunker oil and diesel, among different types, Hyundai Heavy Industry believes that LNG dual fuel option is the most effective option that will let vessels in compliance with the regulations for 2040. As environmental regulation continue to tighten, development of carbon-free vessels has been carried out as well, such as ammonia propulsion, hydrogen-based electric propulsion, and hydroelectric propulsion vessels. We believe that hydrogen-based electric propulsion vessel will ultimately take place, and such research and development is currently being carried out. Competition with Chinese shipbuilders can eventually be seen as a competition on dual propulsion systems, development of future vessels, and experience on building high specification vessels. We are currently planning to make a large-scale investment to future vessels and digital shipyards, like a smart shipyard, to widen the gap with the other shipbuilders. And it seems unlikely that Chinese shipbuilders will overtake South Korean shipbuilders in the short time and mid time, as there is a wide gap in the technology experience in terms of eco-friendly vessels? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sung. Yeah, that lays out all the competitive edge South Korean shipbuilders, shipyards have in terms of building future vessels. I was thinking maybe, Mr. Proctor, can you comment on what's been discussed so far, since it's been so long since you last spoke?
Thank you, Jeen. I think just picking up on a few elements that were said regarding dual fuel propulsion, there's no doubt that LNG will play an important role going forward in the propulsion of ships, and certainly some of our ships already we have that capability. I would also say that we need to ensure that the vessels that we're building today, this is, I think, a key consideration for all the yard builders. And I know we have one of them on the call today, is that maximizing the ability to not only store LNG in the future, but also have the ability to retrofit out the storage tanks, the fuel supply units, which you have on board the ships to future low carbon fuels. And this means greater collaboration between the yard, many of the suppliers like GTT, which I know Korean shipyards have a great relationship with, to try and minimize the future switching costs as we move from natural gas to ammonia. Hydrogen, I think, is more challenging for a variety of reasons, but I certainly think that as we look to ammonia-based fuels, which is still a hydrogen-based fuel, that the industry would do well from having leadership when it comes to the ability to switch at a reasonable cost from LNG to ammonia in the future. This is something which I would say is the one question that the more sophisticated owners constantly ask. It is one which we ask, and we're looking to deploy billions of dollars of capital. So we can be a key stakeholder in this process with the Korean yards. The other point I would go to, and in terms of the competitiveness of Korean yards, I would say not only focus on deep sea, and Ms. Lee is right, Korea is phenomenal and is a very large percentage of the GRT of ships produced globally at Korean yard. But I think we need to think to the next 10 to 15 years. What are the types of ships that we're going to be building? To do what? What cargoes will they be carrying? What type of purposes? You know, we won't be building Newcastle Maxes in 2030. We won't be building BLCCs in 2032, right? We might be carrying carbon dioxide or hydrogen. We might be needing to have more and more electrified assets. So how the industry itself is going to increase the digitalization and the electrification leadership that it will need to compete. Because these will be key areas. Just to give you an example, and this is where I think we can be a great player with Korea. We have a collaboration with Damen Shipyards, which is the global #1 in digital and electrified vessels. They're based in the Netherlands. They integrate a lot of different technologies. We put our capital behind them to help them find customers. We can do the same in Korea. We could help Korean shipbuilders, and we have very, very deep pockets. We can help the Korean shipyards and the Korean capital markets. It could be our good friends at KOMARF. I've known them well over the years. It's been a company I think I've known now for 15 years. And I think there's great things we could do together. We could find new customers, help finance those new customers with time charters. there's a lot which could be done, but I would also urge the shipbuilding community to focus on integrating some of the leading technologies, maybe also widening their focus in terms of not just deep sea shipping, but also some of the more climate aligned sectors, whether that's in the ferries or the fisheries or the SOVs. There's cruise we are also seeing. I will tell you this, and I'll just say this last point before I leave. I was talking to the chairman of CLIA in Europe, and that's a cruise line industry association, about a year ago. And they had just done a survey of travel agents. They were interviewing people who go on holiday, people like us on this call. And they were asking the respondents, would they pay more to have a carbon neutral holiday? Do they take into consideration the carbon emissions on the cruise ships that they go, right? The answer was overarchingly yes. So now admittedly there was a high German percentage in that response base. But when you think about the global cruise industry, which is predominantly American and European today, right? It didn't really take off as we thought it might do in China. Yeah. But there is a massive shift towards low carbon cruising. Why not have Korea as the leader in low carbon green cruise ship, right? Why not? So I'll just stop there, Jeen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, he pointed out very essential areas, key areas of potential development in terms of maximizing ability, storage, cost reduction, cooperation, digitization, all these keywords. Speaking of competition in terms of cost reduction, we can't discuss without talking about China, which leads to our next question for Dr. Lee. Back to Dr. Lee. How can South Korean shipyards benefit from the international and domestic capital markets to help them compete with state Chinese shipyards, which are supported by large leasing houses?
Okay. Actually, we don't have Chinese style ship leasing companies in Korea. As I said before, Korean the shipyards received financial support from mainly the ECA, Korean ECA, Export Import Bank of Korea and KSOE, and the international commercial banks. Actually, we have for the ship specialized funds company in Korea, including KOMARF here. I mean, there are some cases of managing ship funds among asset management companies, but the proportion is quite small. Rather, even though it is not a common case, state-run banks such as Korea Action Bank and DDB, Korea Development Bank, supported domestic shipyard by setting up large funds with institutional investors. I introduced KOBC, Korea Overseas Business Corporation, which was established in 2018. KOBC has a plan to act as a tonnage provider in near future. I think when the function of a tonnage provider is activated, it will be able to play the similar role as Chinese ship lease companies. As I said before, Korean institutional investors have not been active in ship investment, So state-run banks try to encourage institutional investors to participate in ship finance market for example, there is recent news that 4 government financial agencies, including KEXIM, KDB, KEMCO, Korea Asset Management Corporation, and KOBC, will create a new building support program for eco-friendly vessels by 2030. They will participate in the program as junior lenders to encourage institutional investors to invest in this project. The program's finance amount will be $1.5 billion and up to $3 billion if necessary, in consideration of a future demand of a new building. So I hope that the institutional investors in Korea will participate in ship finance a lot afterwards. Okay. It's my opinion.
Thank you.
Maybe, Jeen, I will just make a few points if I may.
Sure, go on.
So I would add to what Mr. Lee says. You got a formidable competitor in China. I lived there for 16 years. I know the country relatively well. Their ship leasing industry is huge. It's phenomenally large. On average, an average ship lessor, the Chinese state ship lessor, is about $30 billion on average. And they have hundreds of them, right? So the amount of capital they have to support shipbuilding, CSSC, as we all know, is a very large group, is phenomenal. And then they have the state banks and the commercial banks. So there's a very, very deep pool of capital. However, there is a weakness. This is the benefit for Korea. China is increasingly closed off from the Western capital markets. Its relationships with the West have suffered over the last few years, unfortunately, but this is just what it is. China's been a great friend to me, but it's just the reality of what I see. And I think this is the opportunity for Korea to catch, which is to forge relationships with the West on Western capital markets to help them build the Korean shipbuilding capacity, finance the Korean shipbuilding capacity. Korea is a friend of America. Korea is a friend of Europe. And the collaboration could lead to phenomenal results, because Korea will need the depth of money which is in Europe and America, which is still multiples of what there are in China today, 5, 10, 20 times more. So there's a great possible partnership and collaboration. We are just one of those conduits. We are just one of those partners. Korea has been a phenomenal friend to me, and would like to reciprocate and see whether or not we can collaborate with Korea going forward. I think we're $250 million of equity now. We will have $2 billion likely next year. That equals $10 billion of ships. That's a lot of ship orders for Korea. And so I know there's great things that we could do together, but it requires collaboration, I think, with the West.
Yeah, this structure of China versus rest of the world, it's quite redundant. It's repeating itself across different industries. For instance, semiconductor industry. I heard they're actually opening up as opposed to, like you mentioned, closing off from the Western world because of American efforts to put up their own supply chain, like within America, and not depend on partnerships. Do you think China may do that in terms of shipyard and shipping maritime industry? Maybe open up because of pressures from the Western side of the world?
Right, it's already the supply chain in China or within China. So if you look at the average makers list on a ship, I just ordered 3 last week, and I was going through putting on makers lists on the new build contract. they're all Chinese. And this is not just because of the trade war. This is because of COVID. The supply chains don't work anymore. So you can't have dependencies on a particular device or component which might be built in Germany, or might be built in the Netherlands, or might be built in Finland or Norway. You need to have self-sufficiency, because if you can't move that component from Europe to, let's say, China in a short period of time, according to your shipbuilding production process, it slows down the whole construction. And this is what we really see. We really see this happening real time. So there is a need to have local industry to ensure you can produce on time. There's also technology issues related to the lack of access to intellectual property from overseas. So I do see this as a closing off from the West. I don't see this as an opening up whatsoever.
Yeah.
One thing I can add to what Julian mentioned, and as Mr. Lee mentioned, is that the KOBC, KDB, Exim, the public, supporters in Korea are focused on, domestic shipping industry. So their criteria is nationality. That means the Korean shipping companies, when the Korean shipping companies build their ships, they can be supported. But the cross-border, kind of orders or shipbuilding streams may not be supported by that kind of entities. So in this case, I think interest efforts would be quite important to rebuild the investment industry in Korea, focused on the institutional, other institutional investors, and some kind of gap between the European investors' returns and the Korean investors' returns. There should be, I think, one key, concern in this case.
May I throw the fourth question for you, Mr. Seo? Are institutional investors in South Korea prepared to take possibly lower returns coming from climate-aligned investments, considering that there's such a huge competition coming from China?
Yeah, that is the point. I think institutional investors seem to compare, in general, the ship financing or ship equity investments to the kind of the real estate or infrastructure investments. I mean the level of returns. As those returns on infrastructure or real property investments have fallen so far, they are eager to find higher returns under similar risk profiles. As mentioned earlier, they have become keen to eco-friendly investments, and more institutions have employed environment-friendly guidelines to their investments. So in my opinion, at least steadily or slowly, they will accept the lower returns as their benchmarks. The key thing would be how they measure the environmental cost on each investment projects, say how they discount non-tangible future costs to be incurred by not being complied with CO2 reduction programs or kind of environmental regulations. So as far as shipping industry is concerned, CO2 emission control is not a matter of choice, but it is utmost mandatory requirement. So investors are aware of this aspect very well. So the matter is whether they are going to have more appetite for ship investments. I mean the Korean institutions, particularly equity investments, not the debt or loans, the senior investments. The equity investments is the key point here.
Okay, do you think
on that
capitals,
okay.
wait.
Okay, may I add something?
Yeah, of course.
The question briefly. Actually, currently, Korean investors are well aware of the importance of ESG and especially climate change issue. Until now, investment have been made according to credit ratings based on financial indicators. But when we make an investment in the future, we may focus on sustainability, including climate change issue. We recognize that climate alignment investment is like an investment in sustainability. So Korean investors will prefer to invest in a project where companies with a high long-term sustainability, which inevitably leads to a lower return on this investment. Therefore, investors may agree that climate aligned investment will yield lower returns. It is like the high credit projects or companies have a lower returns. Yeah.
Thank you. Since we're running low on time, can I just throw the last question on you, Dr. Lee again? Do you think there's an opportunity for collaboration between governments and users, any type of capital providers, and ship fabricators to solve the challenge in regards to climate altogether? For example, when German government gives out subsidies, Volkswagen gives long-term TCDB low-cost capital. Do you think this could happen in South Korea, realistically?
We don't have such the cooperation case in Korea yet. I think this is expected to be a good way to tackle the climate change issue. So it is enough for the Korean government to promote it actively in response to the climate change problem. However, if Korean shipyard receive government subsidies directly, it may violate the WTO export subsidy restrictions, regulations. In the past, Korea has been sued by the EU several times in the WTO for subsidies to shipyard. Therefore, it is worth considering the introduction of the tax lease system into Korea. The tax lease system has been implemented in some European countries. The tax lease system creates tax benefits through accelerated depreciation in the early stages of a ship investment. When the tax benefits are shared among investors, shipping companies, and shipyards, the cooperation among these stakeholders will be successful. There have been some discussions for introducing the tax lease system into Korea, but the issue of tax fairness has been a big obstacle for the introduction of this system. However, if it is restricted to eco-friendly vessels or climate-aligned investment, the issue of tax fairness will be weakened, and the systems might be possible to be introduced. I think through these tax list systems, we can make an opportunity for collaboration among government, ship owners, shipyards, and ship investors. Okay.
Thank you so much. Are there any comments? Anything you'd like to add?
I think the only thing, Jeen, that I would, when I'm next up in Seoul and Busan, I'm looking forward to meeting up with the panel we had here today and discussing how we can do business together. But in the meantime, I would urge, and we can probably discuss this offline, maybe potentially with Mr. Su as well, regarding how we can potentially cooperate. And I think that's something which we should definitely do, because KOMARF is great business, and I'm sure we can do many things together with them. And he will know many of the people that I know at KOMARF from the past. So we have a relatively good shared history. So I'm looking forward to doing that with Mr. Su at the right time.
Thank you. Did you all enjoy the discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, really did.
Better than not having joined it. Hopefully. Yeah, that wraps our webinar up. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll provide my email address, or if you like to comment. And we're also holding the main conference, which is in September, 8th of September this year. If Corona goes away by then, hopefully we can all meet in Seoul. Thank you.